Section 2, Chapters 8 through 15 of the Second Apology of St. Justin Martyr. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by M. White. The Second Apology by St. Justin Martyr. Translated by Alexander Roberts et al. Chapters 8 through 15. Chapter 8. All have been hated in whom the Word has dwelt. And those of the Stoic school, since, so far as their moral teaching went, they were admirable, as were also the poets in some particulars, on account of the seed of reason, the Logos, implanted in every race of men, were, we know, hated and put to death. Heraclitus, for instance, and among those of our own time, Musonius and others. For, as we intimated, the devils have always affected that all those who anyhow live a reasonable and earnest life, and shun vice, be hated. And it is nothing wonderful, if the devils are proved to cause those to be much worse hated, who live not according to a part only of the word diffused among men, but by the knowledge and contemplation of the whole word which is Christ. And they, having been shut up in eternal fire, shall suffer their punishment and penalty. For if they are even now overthrown by men through the name of Jesus Christ, this is an intimation of the punishment in eternal fire which is to be inflicted on themselves and those who serve them. For thus did both all the prophets foretell, and our own teacher, Jesus, teach. Chapter 9. Eternal punishment, not a mere threat. And that no one may say what is said by those who are deemed philosophers, that our assertions that the wicked are punished in eternal fire are big words and bugbears, and that we wish men to live virtuously through fear, and not because such a life is good and pleasant, I will briefly reply to this, that if this be not so, God does not exist. Or if he exists, he cares not for men, and neither virtue nor vice is anything, and, as we said before, lawgivers unjustly punish those who transgress good commandments. But since these are not unjust, and their Father teaches them by the word to do the same things as himself, they who agree with them are not unjust. And if one object that the laws of men are diverse, and say that with some one thing is considered good, another evil, while with others what seemed bad to the former is esteemed good, and what seemed good is esteemed bad, let him listen to what we say to this. We know that the wicked angels appointed laws conformable to their own wickedness, in which the men who are like them delight. And the right reason, when he came, proved that not all opinions nor all doctrines are good, but that some are evil, while others are good. Wherefore I will declare the same and similar things to such men as these, and, if need be, they shall be spoken of more at large. But at present I return to the subject. Chapter 10. Christ compared with Socrates. Our doctrines, then, appear to be greater than all human teaching, because Christ, who appeared for our sakes, became the whole rational being, both body and reason and soul. For whatever either lawgivers or philosophers uttered well, they elaborated by finding and contemplating some part of the word. But since they did not know the whole of the word, which is Christ, they often contradicted themselves. And those who by human birth were more ancient than Christ, when they attempted to consider and prove things by reason, were brought before the tribunals as impious persons and busybodies. And Socrates, who was more zealous in this direction than all of them, was accused of the very same crimes as ourselves. For they said that he was introducing new divinities, and did not consider those to be gods whom the state recognized. But he cast out from the state both Homer and the rest of the poets, and taught men to reject the wicked demons, and those who did the things which the poets related, and he exhorted them to become acquainted with the God who was to them unknown, by means of the investigation of reason, saying, that it is neither easy to find the Father and Maker of all, nor, having found him, is it safe to declare him at all. But these things our Christ did through his own power, for no one trusted in Socrates so as to die for this doctrine, but in Christ, who is partially known even by Socrates, for he was and is the Word, who is in every man, and who foretold the things that were to come to pass through the prophets, and in his own person, when he was made of like passions, and taught these things. not only philosophers and scholars believed, but also artisans and people entirely uneducated, despising both glory and fear and death, since he is a power of the ineffable Father, not the mere instrument of human reason. Chapter 11. How Christians View Death. But neither should we be put to death, nor would wicked men and devils be more powerful than we, were not death a debt due by every man that is born. Wherefore we give thanks when we pay this debt, and we judge it right and opportune to tell here, for the sake of Cretans and those who rave as he does, what is related by Xenophon. Hercules, says Xenophon, coming to a place where 3 ways met, found virtue and vice, who appeared to him in the form of women, vice in a luxurious dress, and with a seductive expression rendered blooming by such ornaments, and her eyes of a quickly melting tenderness, said to Hercules that if he would follow her, she would always enable him to pass his life in pleasure, and adorned with the most graceful ornaments, such as were then upon her own person. And Virtue, who was of squalid look and dress, said, But if you obey me, you shall adorn yourself not with ornament, nor beauty that passes away and perishes, but with everlasting and precious graces. And we are persuaded that every one who flees those things that seem to be good, and follow hard after what are reckoned difficult and strange, enters into blessedness. For vice, won by imitation of what is incorruptible, for what is really incorruptible she neither has nor can produce, she has thrown around her own actions, as a disguise, the properties of virtue, and qualities which are really excellent, leads captive earthly-minded men, attaching to virtue her own evil properties. But those who understood the excellences which belong to that which is real, are also uncorrupt in virtue. And this every sensible person ought to think both of Christians and of the athletes, and of those who did what the poets relate of the so-called gods, concluding as much from our contempt of death, even when it could be escaped. Chapter 12. Christians proved innocent by their contempt of death. For I myself too, when I was delighting in the doctrines of Plato, and heard the Christians slandered, and saw them fearless of death, and of all other things which are counted fearful, perceived that it was impossible that they could be living in wickedness and pleasure. For what sensual or intemperate man, or who that counts it good to feast on human flesh, could welcome death that he might be deprived of his enjoyments, and would not rather continue always the present life, and attempt to escape the observation of the rulers? And much less would he denounce himself when the consequences would be death. This also the wicked demons have now caused to be done by evil men, for having put some to death on account of the accusations falsely brought against us, they also drag to the torture our domestics, either children or weak women, and by dreadful torments force them to admit those fabulous actions which they themselves openly perpetrate, about which we are the less concerned, because none of these actions are really ours, and we have the unbegotten and ineffable God as witness both of our thoughts and deeds. For why did we not even publicly profess that these were the things which we esteemed good, and prove that these are the divine philosophy, saying that the mysteries of Saturn are performed when we slay a man, and that when we drink our fill of blood, as it is said we do, we are doing what you do before that idol you honor, and on which you sprinkle the blood not only of irrational animals, but also of men, making a libation of the blood of the slain by the hand of the most illustrious and noble man among you, and imitating Jupiter and the other gods in sodomy and shameless intercourse with women, might we not bring as our apology the writings of Epicurus and the poets? But because we persuade men to avoid such instruction, and all who practice them and imitate such examples, as now in this discourse we have striven to persuade you, we are assailed in every kind of way. But we are not concerned, since we know that God is a just observer of all. But would that even now some one would mount a lofty rostrum and shout with a loud voice, Be ashamed, ye who charge the guiltless with those deeds which yourselves openly could commit, and ascribe things which apply to yourselves and to your gods to those who have not even the slightest sympathy with them. Be ye converted, become wise. Chapter 13. How the Word has been in all men. For I myself, when I discovered the vile wicked disguise which the evil spirits had thrown around the divine doctrines of the Christians, to turn aside others from joining them, laughed both at those who framed these falsehoods, and at the disguise itself, and at popular opinion, and I confess that I both boast and with all my strength strive to be found a Christian, not because the teachings of Plato are different from those of Christ, but because they are not in all respects similar, as neither are those of the others, Stoics, and poets, and historians. For each man spoke well in proportion to the share he had of the spermatic word, seeing what was related to it. But they who contradict themselves on the more important points appear not to have possessed the heavenly wisdom, and the knowledge which cannot be spoken against. Whatever things were rightly said among all men are the property of us Christians. For next to God we worship and love the Word, who is from the unbegotten and ineffable God, since also he became man for our sakes, that becoming a partaker of our sufferings, he might also bring us healing. For all the writers were able to see realities darkly, through the sowing of the implanted word that was in them. For the seed and imitation impacted according to capacity is one thing, and quite another is the thing itself, of which there is the participation and imitation according to the grace which is from him. Chapter 14. Justin prays that this appeal be published. And we therefore pray you to publish this little book, appending what you think right, that our opinions may be known to others, and that these persons may have a fair chalice of being freed from erroneous notions and ignorance of good, who by their own fault are become subject to punishment, that so these things may be published to men, because it is in the nature of man to know good and evil, and by their condemning us, whom they do not understand, for actions which they say are wicked, and by delighting in the gods who did such things, and even now require similar actions from men, and by inflicting on us death, or bonds, or some other such punishment, as if we were guilty of these things, they condemn themselves, so that there is no need of other judges. Chapter 15. Conclusion. And I despise the wicked and deceitful doctrine of Simon of my own nation. And if you give this little book your authority, we will expose him before all, that, if possible, they may be converted. For this end alone did we compose this treatise. And our doctrines are not shameful, according to a sober judgment, but are indeed more lofty than all human philosophy. And if not so, they are at least unlike the doctrines of the Sotadists, and Philadians, and dancers, and Epicureans, and such other teachings of the poets, which all are allowed to acquaint themselves with both as acted and as written. And henceforth we shall be silent, having done as much as we could, and having added the prayer that all men everywhere may be counted worthy of the truth. And would that you also, in a manner becoming piety and philosophy, would for your own sakes judge justly. End of Section 2, Chapters 8 through 15. Recording by M. White. The Second Apology by St. Justin Martyr. Translated by Alexander Roberts et al.